You're listening to the World Food Prize Podcast, dialogue that feeds the world. Twice a month, we bring you inspiring conversations with the leaders, innovators, and changemakers working to increase food and nutrition security. From groundbreaking research to global initiatives, we explore the ideas and actions driving food and nutrition security, sustainability, and opportunity for all. Join us as we uncover solutions, share stories, and work toward a more food and nutrition secure future. The Wellmark Foundation is proud to present the World Food Prize Podcast as part of our commitment to improving the health of all Iowans and South Dakotans. Access to nutritious food is essential for living a long, healthy life, and this partnership underscores the importance of advancing a food and nutrition secure future for all. Please welcome Ambassador Michael Froman and your host, World Food Prize Foundation CEO, Thomas Vilsack.
Welcome to the World Food Prize Podcast, dialogue that feeds the world. Each episode, we spotlight the people, ideas, and innovations driving progress toward a food and nutrition secure future. Reliable access to food and the quality of that food influence global stability, economic opportunity, and human well-being. Today, we're examining how these challenges intersect with global dynamics with Ambassador Michael Froman, President of the Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador Froman brings decades of experience shaping U.S. and global economic and trade policy, including serving as U.S. Trade Representative under President Barack Obama and as Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economic Affairs. He also held senior leadership roles in the private sector, including serving as Vice Chairman and President of the Strategic Growth at MasterCard. Throughout his career, he has advanced initiatives that connect trade, development, finance, and global partnerships to promote long-term stability and growth. Ambassador Froman, thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Mike, again, thank you so much for taking a few minutes with us today. I'm not sure you know where you are. You've been traveling all over the world the last couple of weeks. Just got back from Munich and the Munich Security Conference. Some people may not even understand what that is and why we have such a conference. Can you explain kind of what it is, why you went to it, and maybe what you learned from it?
Well, it's been around for about 60 years, and it really was, for a while, it was a very quiet gathering of defense officials and military officials, largely transatlantic, U.S., European groups of people coming together. They hold it in this one hotel in downtown Munich, and while it's grown significantly, you now have thousands of people who go. They insist on keeping it in that same hotel, so it just becomes a much more crowded kind of affair, and it's expanding. So it has become really kind of the go-to conference if you are in the national security field. And it's reached a tipping point where now people go there to meet their counterparts from other countries, knowing that they're all going to be attending this conference. And so you've got, this year, Secretary Rubio gave the U.S. speech. Last year, it was Vice President Vance. President Zelensky was there, President Macron, Chancellor Merz, etc. And you get people from all over the world coming to this one hotel in Munich for about 3 days, very intense conversations.
And what did you learn? What do you take? What's the takeaway?
Well, look, it's needless to say, it's a very tumultuous time in transatlantic relations. Last year, Vice President Vance came and gave quite a noteworthy speech because he really talked about, he sort of presaged the Trump's perspective on Europe's potential civilizational decline and underscored that they needed to deal with migration issues and allow greater freedom for some of their right-wing parties to participate in their politics. This year, Secretary Rubio came and particularly after the whole Greenland flap, gave some reassurance that, in fact, the U.S. was committed to Europe, that we had this common history, that it was important to ground the relationship in common interests. But he didn't pull his punches, and he really pushed the Europeans on a number of issues. And the Europeans themselves, who've been talking for a long time about getting their act together on economic reform, on a single market, on stronger defense collaboration within Europe, they were very much seized with that. And somehow, I think between the pressure of President Trump on one hand and President Putin on the other, it may finally move Europe towards taking on some of these very difficult issues.
Well, at the World Food Prize, we're obviously focused on a world where there's less food and nutrition insecurity. And recently, a number of Nobel laureates and food prize laureates came together, issued a letter, challenged the world to produce more. And in producing the letter, they made the connection between conflict and food and nutrition insecurity. So tell me from what you learned at the Munich conference and what you've seen recently, where are we in terms of conflict? Where are we in terms of a world that's safer or less safe? And what impact do you think that's going to have on our ability to ultimately get to a world where there simply aren't hungry people anymore?
Well, first of all, I should note that over the years, the agenda of Munich has expanded. They've included more people from the global south. They've talked about development, and they actually have a food security track of work there, which is very important, a task force that's been underway for a couple of years. So they take this issue very seriously and see the linkage, just as you're saying, between security issues and food security or food insecurity as being absolutely intertwined. To your point, there is sort of this feedback loop where where we see where conflict breaks out, whether it's in the Sahel or between Russia and Ukraine or in the Middle East, food insecurity often follows. And then as people are food insecure, it tends to lead to further conflict, and it leads to migration and pressures on neighboring states that may not be terribly well suited to take refugees and address their needs as well. So it becomes there's spillover effects. It becomes both a regional issue, even a global issue, as people move usually to the neighboring state, and then if they're not able to sustain themselves there, they tend to move on from Africa to Europe or from Latin America to the United States, and it becomes much more of a global issue. So that's one linkage there. And then there's actually the use of food as a tool of conflict, as a tool of war, whether it's in turning on and off food aid and access to food, or whether it's attacking agricultural infrastructure, or just denying access for humanitarian purposes. And food then becomes an issue that has broad implications for the conflict itself. We saw when Russia first did the full-scale invasion of Ukraine now almost 4 years ago, one of the top concerns was Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe, the breadbasket of the world, that it might have difficulty exporting its wheat to other places. We know what happens when wheat prices go up in places like Egypt, and bread prices go up, and it leads to instability there. And also the Russians' use of control over fertilizer, which farmers very much needed, and made it difficult for them to plant for that season.
Well, you've sort of painted a complicated web that sort of interconnects with food. I know that the Council on Foreign Relations is an extraordinary organization, and you find yourself as the head of it. Mike, you could have done a lot of things with your post-government service, given the magnitude of your service, the scope of your service, the extraordinary work that you did. Why the Council on Foreign Relations? And maybe you can explain to folks who might not be familiar with what the Council is, why do we have a Council on Foreign Relations?
Sure. Well, the Council's been around since 1921. It was started in the aftermath of World War I and the aftermath of the defeat of the League of Nations by the U.S. Senate to push back against isolationism. And it was based on the notion that the U.S. should be engaged in the world for its own interests, that it was in the interest of the United States to be engaged in the world. And it's been present at these critical moments in history, like 1921, like 1945, when the Marshall Plan and NATO, those ideas were fleshed out here at the Council. In the 1960s, there was the late 1950s, early 1960s, there was a young Harvard academic named Henry Kissinger who came to the Council and wrote the treatise that became basically the foundation of our nuclear strategy. In 1991, when the wall came down and the end of the Cold War, the Council was the place that sort of came up with the notion of geoeconomics and the linkage between economics and national security. This is another one of those moments in time when fundamental questions, I mean, the Cold War is over, the post-Cold War period is over, and now we have to think through, well, what does it look like going forward, and how do we make sure we are pursuing America's interests in a way that maximizes what's good for American workers and farmers and ranchers, American firms, for the American economy, and promotes our values around the world. So I came here because it's just such a fantastic platform. It has been historically for driving some of the most interesting thought on these issues, and I feel very privileged to help lead it at this point when these changes were happening anyway, and then we have President Trump who's come in and has raised fundamental questions about the way things have been done over the last 80 years. And that makes for a very important and interesting discussion that needs to be had about, okay, what do we learn from the 80 years? What are we learning from the current experience we're in? And where do we go from here?
Well, I want to explore that with you, but before I do, the Council on Foreign Relations has so much information that it provides. You've got newsletters, you've got reports, you have panel discussions, you have guests that are available to listen in on. And one of the things you recently published was your sort of a review of the world and the areas of conflict. I think you preventative priorities. You talk about the importance of knowing where the hot spots are and where they could be. Give us a little sense. Take us a tour around the world. Where should we be concerned? Where do we need to keep an eye on, especially as it relates to that connection between conflict and food security?
Well, you're referring to our preventative priority survey, which we come out with every year. We survey not just our members. We have 5,400 members who tend to be leaders in a variety of fields, broad, nonpartisan, broad political perspectives, geographic perspectives. But we also survey the broader foreign policy community and ask them, what do they think the biggest risks are that are likely to happen over the next year, and the ones that are likely to have the biggest impact on the United States. And we've had a pretty good record of predicting what the next year was going to look like. So this year came out in December of this year. Big focus on the Middle East, the West Bank and Gaza, intensification of the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. We actually predicted in December that Venezuela would be a big issue. We had to wait till January 3rd for that to happen, but that's certainly the case. We've also, in recent years, the last couple of years, the issue of domestic political violence in the United States made the list for the first time. And of course, we saw over the last couple of years 2 assassination attempts on President Trump, the killing of Charlie Kirk, the killing of politicians in Minnesota, and so that kind of issue is also very much on the horizon. Not surprisingly, issues like Iran, China and Taiwan, North Korea, but also, and to the point of food security, focus on what's going on in the Sahel and the political instability and food insecurity there, what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Bangladesh, in Myanmar, and the Rohingya refugees. So unfortunately, there's a long list of issues that could very much affect our interests here in the United States and come to the fore over the next year.
Well, I'm familiar with the International Rescue Committee's report recently on what they refer to as the New World Disorder. Getting back to your comments about the fact that we're sort of in a transition period, we're entering a new phase, if you will. And they talked about the moving away from international rules and regulations, a rules-based system, the fact that we are getting and moving away from alliances and more towards a transactional world. Do you agree with that assessment as you think about things and as you consider what's going on in the world? And are the risks that they've outlined real or potentially overblown?
Well, I think that the fully multilateral rules-based system that the U.S. designed and promoted and defended over the last 80 years, I think that is effectively dead. that doesn't mean we're going to be in anarchy and have no rules at all. But I think we're now in this world where countries are coming together, coalitions of the willing, coalitions of the ambitious, around particular areas of common interest, and trying to define a new set of rules, at least for them. So it's much more fragmented. It's going to be much more complex to manage. But if you take the example of the United States, we may have pulled out of various multilateral forums, but President Trump recently convened a ministerial in Washington of dozens of countries who want to work together on the issue of critical minerals, lessening our dependence on China, creating a more diversified supply chain, a secure supply chain. And that's the kind of coalition I think we're likely to see. Other countries are continuing to negotiate trade agreements. Europe has recently concluded one with South America, another one with India. There's other countries that the UK has been negotiating trade agreements as well with the Indo-Pacific. That may not be politically palatable in the United States right now, but that doesn't mean we have to sit on the sidelines and just let anarchy rule. I think it means we can engage where we believe we have common interests, try and bring countries together around those interests, and set up rules, even in the absence of a rules-based system.
Didn't the Council on Foreign Relations recently have a fairly significant study on this issue of critical minerals?
We did. We
made
did.
some recommendations.
It's an area, actually, there's a lot of international attention to it. This was a big issue in Munich because of one of the common issues between the U.S. and Europe and so much of the world is this realization of our dependence on China for critical minerals and the desire to, just as a good matter of risk management. It's not an anti-China feeling necessarily by all the countries, but a view that one should not be overly dependent on any one country for any one product. And so I think it's getting countries to begin to work together. In the Council study, I thought was quite interesting. It sort of made the point that we shouldn't try to out-China China. We're not going to be able to invest as much in mining and processing as China has, given our environmental regulations and other issues. We're not going to be able to necessarily compete with them on that basis, and therefore we should be looking at our own strengths, which are really around innovation, and come up with new ways of dealing with the issues rather than trying to just copy another country's playbook. So, for example, we want critical minerals because they feed into issues like our products like magnets, which are so important in so many products. Are there other ways of making magnets that aren't reliant on critical minerals? Are there other ways of getting critical minerals that don't require the messy processing that is so damaging to the environment, which makes it difficult to do in a lot of countries, for example, through recycling of existing products that have critical minerals. So trying to think a little bit outside the box and figure out the goal is to be less dependent. There may be a number of ways of getting to that goal, and let's not just assume we should follow China's playbook to get there.
It's also struck me as kind of interesting that the relationship between China and the United States is so complicated. But on the one hand, we have become dependent a bit on them for the critical minerals that are critical to our economy. On the other hand, they're pretty much dependent on the rest of the world to feed their people. And so food then becomes a significant opportunity for developing a relationship, or at least maintaining a level of relationship that's important. Let's talk about the national security strategy that came out from the Trump administration. You also have sort of studied that and written extensively on it. And what I'm interested specifically is your take on the role within that strategy of soft power and what that actually will look like, given what's taken place with relative to the level of support that we used to give to countries and to aid programs that we now are not doing.
It's a great question because on one hand, the national security strategy, which the Trump administration came out with in, I guess it was December, said we want to have soft power that was unrivaled. It's at the same time that we've dismantled a lot of the institutions through which we have exercised soft power in the past, like USAID, but also Voice of America and our whole broadcasting effort. Some of our soft power has come from being the place where students from all over the world wanted to come and study, and entrepreneurs from all over the world wanted to come and build their next great company. we're making that more difficult right now in terms of visas going to American universities. And we've begun to defund some of the research and development at places like the National Institutes of Health or the National Science Foundation that have underlied so much of our innovative capacity that has attracted people from all over the world to come. So I fear this is one of those areas where the administration has put out one objective, which is to maintain soft power, while at the same time taking actions that actually make it more difficult for them to achieve their objective. And hopefully at some point there'll be some course correction. I think the State Department, while USAID, the Agency for International Development, has been dismantled largely, some of the functions have moved into the State Department, and I think the Secretary of State is trying to figure out how best to continue to do some of the work that was done by USAID, but perhaps in a different way. And if there's reforms to be adopted, that's always a good thing. There's no reason not to pursue efficiencies where one can. I take the issue of, for example, of PEPFAR, which is a great program that President Bush started to deal with AIDS, HIV, particularly in Africa. Very popular in Africa, very effective. I think they finally got it funded, and so they'll continue that. But at the same time, as you know much better than I, the cuts to programs like the World Food Program and FAO and some of the key food security programs have the risk of plunging tens of millions of people into hunger, and at a time when already you have something like 700 million people in the world who are feeling food insecure. And so this is worsening that situation, not helping that situation, and certainly isn't helping the image of the United States around the world, which is one of the goals of soft power.
Yeah, I was struck by the Lancet report that talked about children under the age of 5, that by 2030 they expect 4.5 million children to die. And it's not just the U.S. Other countries have also basically taken a step back with relative to their to the soft power. Again, the Council on Foreign Relations ahead of the game here. You mentioned food as a weapon, and this issue of soft power. You all have a sort of a study or work group that's working on this. They've come up with a pretty interesting concept, which I'd like to get your reaction to. The concept essentially is, look, okay, we're reducing our commitment in this space, but we're significantly increasing it on the defense side. And does the Defense Department now become the go-to department in terms of using their resources to sort of create a different approach to the soft power? Is that possible?
It's possible. And oftentimes we saw in some of the conflicts that we were involved in, where the State Department and USAID and the Defense Department, the military were all working in parallel, that oftentimes the military was given additional tasks because they're just so effective. They're so well trained, and they can get things done. Sometimes it goes way beyond what they were intended for, and on occasion that can be good, and on other occasions it sort of is an overstretch. I think right now the focus on defense and the very significant increases that are being proposed for the defense budget are really about defense and are really about the hardware and the software that are necessary to modernize our defense system, to maintain our capacity to deter and then defeat potential competitors and enemies. We now have an issue with China building up its nuclear forces, and the last arms control agreement basically having expired, that we may face both Russia and China as nuclear deterrent targets, and how we've never had to think before fully about how do we deal with two peer competitors there in the nuclear area. So it's going to require some rethinking of our nuclear strategy and perhaps upgrading of our nuclear capability. There's a lot of investment going into autonomous vehicles with drones, whether it's in the air or on the surface or underwater, land, to supplement what our soldiers do. And so, the military is going through some very significant changes, and driven in part by the technological advances that are being made in the private sector around AI, around autonomy, that creates opportunities for them to rethink how they have pursued warfare in the past.
I wouldn't be doing my job in talking to Ambassador Mike Froman, who served as the U.S. Trade Representative, without asking you at least one trade question. as we see this rules-based system changing and morphing into something different, what impact does that have on trade? Where are we headed with relative to trade, and what are the concerns that you might have?
It's certainly an example of moving away from the multilateral rules-based system. I think the WTO has effectively ground to a halt in terms of a place where negotiations and dispute settlement can happen across all 165 member countries. Again, coalitions of the willing can come together and do agreements, and coalitions of the willing can come together and agree to be bound by certain procedures. But, with the U.S. is following its own set of rules, China has been following its own set of rules for some time. You have the two largest economies in the world who basically exempted themselves from the system, and that sort of raises questions about the viability of that going forward. It's very much in need of reform. The president clearly, feels like tariffs are an incredibly useful tool, not just for trade purposes, but as leverage over other countries, whether it's on fentanyl or migration or political issues, or to punish countries who take actions contrary to what he has set out as U.S. interests. And so, we're seeing tariffs go up. There's a little bit of chaos right now. No one's exactly sure what tariffs have been agreed to or have been announced and have been implemented. Some of the tariffs are subject to legal review by the Supreme Court, and we're awaiting that decision. But clearly, we're going to be living in a higher tariff world, one way or the other, than we have in the past. If you go back, to the administration that you and I served in together, the Obama administration, I think by the end of the Obama administration, we had about a 2.5% tariff, and now we have somewhere between a 14 and 18% tariff. And that has to get paid. Tariff is just a tax. It has to be paid by somebody. So it's possible that the exporters will have to absorb some of that if the importers have leverage. The importers will have to absorb some of that, and ultimately, but that'll hurt their profitability. That'll probably show up in earnings and ultimately in the stock market. Ultimately, it's the consumer who ends up paying the tariffs, and we've seen that there's been an increase in prices. Standard cost of living has gone up, and it's hard to bring those prices down once they've gone up. Tariffs are easy to put on, but hard to get off.
Well, that's certainly true of food costs. People are very sensitive to that, and that, of course, exacerbates the issue of food and nutrition security as food prices go up. Well, look, our time is almost up here, but I've just been thinking about you in terms of your early days, your young life. You had a slightly different goal in mind.
Different color hair, I think.
Well, yeah, but I'm going back way back. But I noticed that we have a launch to the moon to put people on the moon, and I'm wondering whether or not Michael Froman, who's sitting in this interview today, still holds out hope that he can be an astronaut.
Look, I was born in 1962. I remember so well coming home from school and watching the Apollo launches on our little TV and wanting to be an astronaut. And now we have commercial space flight. We have space tourism. So I'd say nothing's impossible, Tom. I'm not sure my wife would let me, but I'd say nothing's impossible.
Well, you've certainly been around the world. Maybe you need to be above the world.
There you go.
Michael Froman, thank you so much for being with us today. An extraordinarily informative time. I could talk to you for hours, but in the meantime, I'm just going to continue to read your newsletter and feel like I'm being informed by a guy who knows the world.
Well, you're very
as complicated
kind,
as it is.
Thanks so much for having me, and it was a great honor working with you, and I really enjoy watching you and the organization continue to move forward on this critically important issue of food security.
Well, we're looking forward to being at the Council on Foreign Relations. You guys are kind enough to let us make our laureate announcement there. So looking forward to that.
March 25th, right?
That's right.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the World Food Prize podcast. If today's conversation inspired you, we invite you to take the next step. By making a gift, you help support dialogue like this. Elevate innovative solutions. Give voice to science and invest in the next generation of leaders working to end hunger. Visit worldfoodprize.org to donate, learn more, and get involved. Together, through dialogue and action, we can sustainably feed the world.